أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد، والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله، بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، وما آتاكم الرسول فخذوه وما نهاكم عنه فانتهوا. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us the tawfiq to remember Abi Abdullah, to be a part of his movement. May Allah grant our hajats, may Allah accept our a'mal, and may Allah increase our knowledge when it comes to his ma'rifah, when it comes to the ma'rifah of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. When we examine the different narrations of the Ahlul Bayt and how they interacted with Abi Abdullah alayhi salatu wasalam, you find that their interactions with him was an interaction of humility, it was an interaction of respect, it was an interaction of showing honor to a man who gave everything he had to save the madhab of Rasulullah, the true madhab of Rasulullah, to save the religion of Rasulullah, to preserve and to guard the message that was demonstrated on the day of Ghadir. You find, for example, when you come across narrations amongst the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, what's interesting is that you'll find that the Ahlul Bayt promoted and advocated the concept of mourning and weeping and lamenting, which is directed towards Abi Abdullah salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. In fact, you come across many narrations. From amongst them, we have a hadith from the fifth holy Imam Al-Baqir salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, in which he comes forward and he explains the strategy in the way we should lament. When he was asked, for example, what is the concept of lamentation, mourning and weeping, he said the highest level of lamentation, the highest level of lamentation that is projected or that can be demonstrated or is manifested is when a person begins to beat his chest, number one. Number two, when he begins to pull the hair from his head. And number three, when he begins to slap his face. This is the highest manifestation of lamentation that can be manifested by an individual. You find, for example, he comes in a different narration and he says, "Kullu jaza'in makruh," that every form of lamentation is seen as makruh. So, when I take these narrations and bring them together, I come to an understanding that when I demonstrate mourning and lamentation to any human being, say for example I lost someone in my family, someone who was dear to me in my heart, they passed on, they passed away. When I engage in their burial rites, you find that naturally I as a human being, I will feel emotions of sadness, of grief. I will feel the need and the urge to lament. When I act out in these styles of lamentation, by beating myself, by slapping myself, by pulling my hair, wailing and screaming. According to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, this is makruh. And the reason why it's makruh is because it reminds us that death in itself is not the end of the human being. Rather, it's a new beginning for that human being. As much as it is difficult for us to bear seeing or separating from this loved individual, we have to remind ourselves that death is just a new beginning for this individual. Death is a movement from one arena to a different arena, from one reality to a different reality. And this is something that we need to be conscious of. In the areas of, for example, in the death, according to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, is merely the changing of clothes. It is not the end of the human being. And so therefore the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam came forward and said that when you depart from your close ones, be sure to be, or to hold yourself, or to carry yourself, which is in an appropriate way. And not to, for example, lament and weep and show signs of grievances, which are seen as makruh, reprehensible. In a different narration, Imam Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi takes it a step further. Comes forward and he says that lamentation, weeping, wailing is reprehensible, except when it is directed to our grandfather Abi Abdullah salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. So now Imam Sadiq alayhi salam beautifully in this narration comes forward and gives a unique position to Imam alayhi salam. And he makes it clear that Abi Abdullah alayhi salatu wasalam is an exception. Is an exception within our Sharia. That lamenting for any amwat is reprehensible except when it is for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. When Rayyan ibn al-Shabib enters the presence of Imam al-Rida, Imam al-Rida says to him, Ya ibn al-Shabib, or ibn al-Shabib, when you cry, then cry for Abi Abdullah. إن كنت باكيا فابكي للحسين عليه السلام. And so this is something that is not just mentioned by the 5th Imam or the 6th Imam or the 8th Imam, but you find that this is something that has been upheld by the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam in general as well. And so in tonight's discussion, or in this evening's discussion, what I want to embark on discussing is how is Imam Hussain alayhi salam seen as an exception. The second area of my discussion I want to speak about is lamentation, crying and weeping, a form of bid'ah or innovation that has crept within our Sharia. Number 3, what are our responses to these arguments made against us? And are there evidences to show that the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam wept and cried for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam? And number 4, finally, what is the purpose and the philosophy of lamenting and crying for Abi Abdullah salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi? With regards to the first area of the discussion, you find that the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam have given a unique position to Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And we can comfortably come forward and say that Abi Abdullah alayhi salatu wa salam is seen as an exception. Exception in fields of aqa'id and exceptions when it comes to ahkam as well. How so in aqa'id? There's a remarkable hadith. They say a man once came to Imam Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, and he asked a remarkable question. Pay attention to this question. The question was, said, Ya ibn Rasulillah, why is it that we mourn for Abi Abdullah of what happened on the 10th of Muharram in such a way that we do not mourn the same way when it comes to the wafat of Rasulullah? As in, Rasulullah was a shaheed as well, but we do not mourn the death or the martyr of Rasulullah the way we mourn the martyr of Abi Abdullah. He says, Ya ibn Rasulullah, why do we not mourn for Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam and what happened to him on the 19th of Ramadan the way we weep for Abi Abdullah? He says, Yabna Rasulullah, why do we not mourn for Fatima al-Zahra, salamullahi alayha? And what happened to her, and the incident of the door, and the breaking of the ribs, the way we mourn for Abi Abdullah. And likewise, why do we not mourn for Imam al-Hussain, the way we weep for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam? Upon which the Imam as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi gives a response. He says, "Oh man, when Rasulullah passed away, after him there were 4 members of the Ahl al-Bayt, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Fatima al-Zahra, Imam Hassan and Imam al-Hussain. And they mourned for Rasulullah the way he deserved to be mourned." He said, when al-Zahra passed away, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, Imam Hassan and Imam al-Hussain wept for her and grieved for her, lamented the way she deserved to be lamented. Likewise, when Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam passed away, Imam Hassan and Imam al-Hussain, they wept for him the way he deserved to be wept and the way he deserved to be remembered. When Imam Hassan passed away, Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam performed the aza of Imam al-Hassan the way he deserved to be remembered and the way he deserved to be lamented. But when Abi Abdullah alayhi salam passed away, there was none to weep for him. And when he said this, the narrator responds, he says, Yabna Rasulullah, but wasn't Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, is he not from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam? Was he not there to mourn for Abi Abdullah alayhi salatu wasalam? Upon which Imam Sadiq replies, he says, yes, he was there. My grandfather al-Sajjad was there. And he mourned for Abi Abdullah alayhi salatu wasalam, but there's a big difference. What's the difference? He says, al-Sajjad is not from Ahl al-Kisa. Al-Sajjad, he is not from those 5 individuals. Meaning that from amongst the 5 individuals, their position, their maqam compared to the rest of the Ahl al-Bayt is different. It's much more higher, it's grandeur. And from amongst them, Abi Abdullah alayhi salam is given an exception that when it comes to his aza, when it comes to his lamentation, it is different compared to that which is projected towards the other 4 members of Ahl al-Kisa. So you find that within our aqa'id, within our aqidah, our tenets of faith, you find that Abi Abdullah alayhi salam has been given a remarkable position that is not shared by the other members of the Ahl al-Kisa. It's not to show that the other members of the Ahl al-Kisa are beneath Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, but it is to show the unique position that he has in the eyes of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. Number 2, when it comes to his ahkam, you find that Imam alayhi salam has been given an exception as well. In which way? Ziyarah. The ziyarah of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam is seen as an exception in the eyes of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. They say that when it comes to the concept of ziyarah, and this is an opinion that is held by some of the maraji today in this day and age, as well as the maraji of the previous centuries, they came forward and they said that when it comes to the ziyarah of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, a person needs to be reminded that it is permissible, that it is seen as mustahab, that a person goes towards the lands of Karbala and he performs the ziyarah of Abi Abdullah. Now a question comes forward. Question is, what if my life is in danger? Can I therefore go? Can I still go on and perform the ziyarah of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam? The opinions of the ulama is that yes, absolutely. In fact, when you transfer the same scenario towards the ziyarah of Rasulullah, as in the question is, say for example, I have the desire to go for Hajj. Let's take the example of Hajj. I want to go for Hajj. I have the qudra, I have the energy, and I have the wealth to go for Hajj. The only thing is that I fear for my life. I fear that my life is in danger if I go for Hajj. What do the fuqaha say? Do they say, yes, go on, go for Hajj, it's wajib on you if it's the first time? The fuqaha say, no, it's not permissible for you to go for Hajj. The reason being is because your life is in danger. Likewise, if I want to go towards, for example, the lands of Medina al-Munawwara to perform the ziyarah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, if I know that my life is in danger, that I will potentially lose my life by going towards the ziyarah of Rasulullah, the fuqaha say it is not permissible for you to go. But when it comes to Karbala, when it comes to Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, you find that the whole concept is different. In which way? The fuqaha come forward and they say that it is permissible. It is in fact recommended that you go towards the ziyarah of Abi Abdullah. The greater the danger, the greater the reward this person will reap. And this is something that is unique for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. When you look towards, for example, the life of Imam al-Hadi, look at Imam al-Hadi and how he interacted with the aza and the ziyarah of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. They say that when he was forcefully migrated, when he was forcefully taken towards the lands of Samarra, they say that when he entered the lands of Samarra, within the first year, he made it upon himself to go and visit his grandfather, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam in Najaf, upholding the spirit of ziyarah. When he visits his grandfather, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, in the coming years, they say, in one of the years in particular, he became very sick. And when he became sick, he was in pain. So he had a few wealth in his hands, he had a few dinars and darahim. So he came to one of his companions and he said to his companions, he said, look, this is some money, I'm giving you this wealth. Take it with you and go to the lands of Karbala. When you go to Karbala, stand alongside the ha'ir of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. Stand very close to the grave of Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam and seek intercession on my behalf. Meaning what? Meaning pray for me under or next to the grave of Abi Abdullah. Now the companion who was a Shia, who was a follower of Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam, he looks towards him and he's baffled, he's completely confused. He says, hold on a second, Yabna Rasulullah, you are a ma'soom, you are a grandson of Rasulullah, one of the Imams. You are the Hujjah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this earth. The way Abu Abdullah alayhi salam is a hujjah upon the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then your du'as and his du'as, they're accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. From that perspective, there's no difference between you and him. I mean, all you have to do is raise your hands and pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah will grant your du'as without you even having need to go to Karbala. He says, why are you sending me to Karbala to pray for you? Upon which the Imam alayhi salam replies, he says, you don't understand. That position that is there under the dome of the shrine of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, alongside his grave, there is no place like this on earth. That place is a place of azama. It is azim. Go and pray for me in that location. So you find, for example, even in times when Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam realized that it was dangerous to go for the ziyarah of Abi Abdullah. Why dangerous? You find that who was the Abbasid at the time of Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam? Mutawakkil. According to historians, Mutawakkil on 17 different accounts tried to destroy the shrine of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. To go to the ziyarah of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam was dangerous. It was very much dangerous. And yet you find Imam al-Hadi sends one of his companions and encourages him to go towards the ziyarah of his grandfather. Otherwise, you find that Imam al-Hadi would have discouraged him to go for the ziyarah of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, saying, for example, that your life is in danger and it is better that you do not go. On the contrary, they used to advocate and they used to send companions to go for the ziyarah of Abi Abdullah alayhi salatu wasalam. Not only that, you find, for example, when the different qafilas used to go for the ziyarah, their limbs were cut off, their legs were cut off, their hands were cut off. Many of them, their lives were taken away from them. And never once did the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam discourage their companions to go for the ziyarah of Abi Abdullah. So when you look at ziyarah from this perspective, you realize or you come to the understanding that the Imam alayhi salam was seen most definitely as an exception. Likewise, when you come to the concept of mourning and weeping, the Imam alayhi salam is seen as an exception. That weeping and lamentation projected to any individual is seen as makruh except for Abi Abdullah salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. It is seen as rewarding. It is seen as an act of ibadah. It is seen as a recommended act of ibadah nonetheless. Moving on to our discussion, the second area of our discussion, you find unfortunately there are many who come forward and they say that when you look towards the Ahl Shia and what they do during the nights of Muharram, when they lament, when they cry, when they beat their chests, some of us, for example, we shed blood. Some of us, for example, we engage in extra levels of lamentation. They come forward and they say that this is not permissible in the religion of Islam. Crying and lamentation projected to any individual is not permissible. The reason why this is because there's a narration of Umar ibn al-Khattab. When he comes forward, in one narration in particular, he comes forward and he says that when a person leaves this world, it is not permissible for anyone to cry over him. And the reason why that is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intensifies the punishment for that mayyit. Based on this narration, the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah believe that it is not permissible to cry over the amwat. And so when they see us lamenting, crying and weeping for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, they come forward and they say that this is bid'ah, because number one, this is far from the Sunnah of Rasulullah. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi had said, do not cry over the amwat. Because we cry over the amwat, or in particular for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, we are doing something which is far from the religion of Islam. In fact, certain scholars came forward and they said that this is deterring the people from the practice. This is deterring the people from the sunnah of the Prophet of Islam. And this is a crime in itself. You find that this nature or this attitude towards the mourning and the lamentation of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam is something that is disproven even by the likes of Aisha, Ummul Mu'mineen, the mother of the believers. They say one day a man came towards her and said to her, I have heard from the second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he narrates from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, who said, do not cry over the amwat, because when you cry, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intensifies the punishment over them or upon them. When Aisha heard this, she said, as she challenged Umar ibn al-Khattab, she says to this person, this narrator who went by the name of Suhaib, it says, Ya Suhaib, Umar, when he was in his final moments, when he said these words, he was mistaken, because I have heard Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi who came forward and said that when a kafir leaves this world and his family gather around him and they cry for him and they lament for him, it is only then that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases and intensifies the punishment for them. Only if the person is a kafir. But if the person is a Muslim, if a person is a mu'min who comes under the banner of Islam, then you find that there is no issue in this whatsoever. And then she mentions a verse of the Holy Quran. And this is a very important verse in our discussion. وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وَزْرَ أُخْرَى, that there is not a single person who will carry the burden. There is not a single person who will carry the burden of another on the Day of Judgment. So when you find that this hadith, when Umar ibn al-Khattab mentions this hadith in particular, who is not only disputed and refuted by Aisha Ummul Mu'mineen, you find that this in particular goes against the principles and the ethos of the Holy Quran. It goes against the aql as well. Why? The reason is because when I cry over my day, when I cry over the dead, for example, why should they be punished over my actions? As in, isn't this, for example, unjust on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? For him to intensify the punishment of this person, whether it be a Muslim or a kafir, because of my actions? As in, what do my actions have to do with him? Why should he carry the burdens of my actions in the first place? So you find that this whole concept, the idea of mourning over the dead, lamentation over the dead, which is seen as haram according to our brothers, according to the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, is based on something that goes against the aql, is something that goes against the ethos of the Holy Quran. وَلَا تَكْسِبُ كُلُّ نَفْسٍ إِلَّا عَلَيْهَا. That every single human being will see the result of their own actions and not the actions of others. They will not carry the burdens of others and how the others interact with them. Rather, on the Day of Judgment, every single individual will see and carry their own actions, and they will see either reward or punishment based on what they did in this world. So when you come across these narrations, it's interesting. It's a very interesting discussion. And the reason being is because you realize how the Sunnah of Rasulullah has been manipulated, and how you find that there are millions in this world today, when they turn towards the Ahl Shia, they discriminate us being from those who are considered to be Ahl al-Mubtada', those who engage in actions which are considered to be bid'ah. But when you dig deeper, you realize that no, this goes against the whole, what we do, how we lament, how we weep for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, is very much in line with the Holy Quran. It is very much in line with the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And this is a very interesting discussion because it opens gates, it opens a door into a whole different dimension, which is, you find that many of our youths, they come forward and they ask questions, especially those who engage in different discussions, polemical discussions, especially those which are engaged between the Shia and the Sunnah. You find many of our youths come forward and they ask questions and they say, how do we prove, or why do we pray with our hands down? Why do we pray on the turba? Why do we, for example, shed tears and mourn for Abu Abdullah alayhi salam? Why do we beat our chests? Why do we do these things which are seen different when compared to the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah? There's a very simple answer to this. You see, for many centuries, our scholars, what they've done is they've gone through the books of our brothers. They've gone through Bukhari, for example, Sahih al-Muslim. They've gone through all of these different books, trying to find evidences. And having found evidences to show that what we do within our madhab is very much in line to the Sunnah of Rasulullah. But there is a much simpler answer to this. And that answer is that we take our understanding of the religion of Islam from the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam. And this is the difference between the Ahl al-Shia and the Ahl al-Sunnah. The Ahl al-Sunnah, they take their religion from whom? The companions of Rasulullah. We take our religion from the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam. Our sources of religion are the Ahl al-Bayt. Their sources of religion are the companions. Whatever the companions tell them to do, they will perform. Whatever the Ahl al-Bayt tell us to do, we will follow them. Because we believe that they are the representatives, spiritual representatives, political representatives of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this world. If the Ahl al-Bayt come forward and they tell me that there is nothing wrong in lamenting and crying and weeping and beating our chests for Abi Abdullah, then I will do so, and there is nothing wrong in this. If the Ahl al-Bayt tell me to prostrate on a turba, for example, then there is nothing wrong in this. This is in par with the Sunnah of Rasulullah. If the Ahl al-Bayt come forward and they tell me, for example, to pray with my hands down, then I should understand that because they are the representatives of Rasulullah, they are the ones who expand on the Sharia of Rasulullah, I know that this is what Allah wants from me, because they are the representatives of not just Rasulullah, but they are the representatives of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. So when I pray, the way I pray, or when I mourn for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, I mourn because they have allowed me to mourn, because they have advocated for me to mourn. They have, for example, encouraged me to mourn for their grandfather, Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. So when you come across, for example, narrations of Aisha, when you come across, for example, narrations of Umar ibn al-Khattab, we respectfully come forward and say, these are not our authorities in religion. These are authorities in your understanding of religion, but not in our understanding of religion. So when Umar ibn al-Khattab, for example, comes forward and says it is not permissible to cry over the deceased, we come forward and we reject this altogether. And as we mentioned, it goes against the aql and it goes against the ayats of the Holy Quran as well. Interestingly, Aisha, as we mentioned, makes this very clear as well. So you find it gives rise to a question. The question is, do we have evidence to show that the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam mourned and wept for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam? We say absolutely. And the narrations are there, very clear within our sources as well as in the sources of our brothers. And when people come and ask the questions, why are the Ahl al-Bayt seen as an authority? You refer back to the ayats, or you refer back to the riwayat of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam. Refer back to the riwayat of Rasulullah. He says, إِنِّي تَارِكٌ فِيكُمُ الثَّقَلَيْنِ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَإِتْرَةِ أَهْلَ بَيْتِ. That I am leaving behind two weighty things. The Kitab of Allah, number one, and the Ahl al-Bayt, number two. The Ahl al-Bayt have an authority that we need to hold on to. And by holding on to them, no one will be led astray. So are there evidences to show that the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam wept and cried for Abi Abdullah alayhi salatu was-salam? We say absolutely. You find, for example, one narration from Fadl, the wife of Abbas. What does she narrate? She narrates that Rasulullah used to cry for Abi Abdullah. Rasulullah used to cry for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. If you want to go deeper into the discussion, you go deeper into the riwayat that we have within our sources, you'll come across the idea that every single prophet of Allah used to cry and weep for Abi Abdullah. Adam used to cry for Hussain. Nuh used to cry for Hussain. Ibrahim cried for Hussain. Ismail cried for Hussain. Musa, Isa, every prophet of Allah cried for Imam al-Hussain. Someone may come and ask the question, how is it possible for them to cry for Abu Abdullah alayhi salam without even Karbala taking place? My answer is simple. The way Rasulullah used to cry for Abi Abdullah, even though Karbala had not taken place before or even during his time. Fadl narrates, the wife of Abbas, the aunt of Rasulullah, she says, one day I had a dream, and it was a horrible dream. It was frightening, so I came towards the Prophet of Islam. I said, Ya Rasulullah, I have seen a frightening dream. And she narrates, she says, tears were flowing from my eyes. Rasulullah said to me, Ya Fadl, what did you see in your dream? She replies, she says, I saw a limb from your body being cut off and being placed in my lap. Rasulullah smiles and he is joyful. He says, Ya Fadl, this is not a bad dream. This is not a horrible dream. This is a very good interpretation. This is a joyful dream in itself. She says, why? He says the interpretation of this dream is that my daughter Fatima will beget a son. She will give birth to a son by the name of Hussain. When Hussain alayhi salam is born, we find the narrations that it was a day of jubilation, a day of joy. The kafilat of the angels came down, descended from the heavens, and they came and they met Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. They say that when Rasulullah began to hold the infant in his hands, tears began to come down from his eyes. He began to lament, he began to weep. Fadl comes forward and she says, Ya Rasulullah, why is it that you weep? This boy has just been born and you weep over him. Upon which Rasulullah replies, he says to her, Ya Fadl, Jibreel has just come to me. He has descended and he has said to me that my will be responsible for butchering him. My will be responsible for slaughtering him. And then Fadl says, Ya Rasulullah, this son, this infant will be slaughtered by your And he replies, yes indeed, my will slaughter this son of mine. You find another narration from Salama, Salama, the mother or the wife, Salama. She comes forward and she narrates, she says that one day Rasulullah, I entered the room and I saw him crying and weeping, and his hands, there were dirt, or there was dirt, sand. I said to him, Ya Rasulullah, why is it that you weep and cry? Upon which he replies that Jibreel has come to me, number one, and he has given me news that my son Hussain will be killed in the sands of Karbala. Jibreel has brought me the sands of Karbala, and these are the sands and the dirts of Karbala. Our ulama in this regards, when they come across this hadith, they came forward and they said that this hadith doesn't just prove the authenticity and the legitimacy of weeping for Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, but it proves the power and the sanctity of the Turba of Karbala. In a third narration, for example, Salama narrates this narration, the daughter of Salama. She says that one day I entered the house of my mother and she was weeping and she was wailing, she was crying. I said to her, my mother, why do you weep and why do you lament in such a way? She replies, she says, I just saw Rasulullah in my dream. And Rasulullah, his beard and his hair was filled with his tears, disheveled by dirt. I said to him, Ya Rasulullah, why do you weep? Upon which he replied to me, he said, Ya Salama, I have just witnessed the massacre of my son or my grandson, Abi Abdullah. I have just seen and witnessed the massacre of Hussain alayhi salam. So you find that these narrations are not just there mentioned within our sources, but these are mentioned within the books of our brothers as well. Amongst them, or amongst these narrations, is what is found in the life of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. They say that when the Imam was heading towards the battle of Siffin, when he was heading towards the lands of Siffin, fighting against Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, he passes through a land. When he passes a land, he stops. When he stops, he begins to wail and he begins to weep and he begins to lament. Ibn Abbas narrates this. He says, I turned towards the Imam alayhi salam, and we were there alongside the rivers of Nainawa, we were there alongside the rivers of Furat. And the Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam would be lamenting in a very loud voice, wailing, wah, wah. He then turned towards me and he said to me, Ya Ibn Abbas, do you know what land this is? Ibn Abbas, he reports, he says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I do not know what land this is. Upon which the Imam responds, he says, if you knew what land this is, if you had knowledge the way I have knowledge with regards to this land and what will transpire in this land, then you will cry and lament the way I am crying and the way I am weeping. They say the way the Imam cried on that day, it was so severe and so intense that all the other companions began to cry just by witnessing the Imam alayhi salam crying. When you refer to, for example, the narrations that is there, as we mentioned earlier and even last night, the sunnah of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, the sunnah of Imam al-Sadiq, the sunnah of Imam al-Zaman, they cry and they weep and they continue to cry and they continue to weep. Look at the words of Imam Sahib al-Asri wal-Zaman, لَأَبْكِيَنَّ لَكَ بدل الدموع الدمع. He says, when I cry for you, Ya Aba Abdullah, I will not cry normal tears for you. I will cry tears of blood, perhaps signifying or symbolizing the extensiveness of crying and shedding tears for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. So you find that the concept of lamentation, you find that the concept of crying and shedding tears for Imam alayhi salam is something very much in par with the religion of Islam, especially when it comes to the idea of following the madhab of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. So when you look at the narrations that were mentioned by Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he says that it is not permissible to cry and to shed tears for any living being or any deceased being, you find that this goes against the ethos of the madhab of the Ahlul Bayt, number one, especially when it is directed towards Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, and especially knowing that his words go against the message of the Quran, as well as the message of the aql. And of course, the aql is something profound given to us, gifted to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, when you come forward to some of the narrations that are there within our sources, these narrations explain to us. These narrations explain to us the profound nature of crying and weeping. When you were to examine, for example, some of the benefits that is there for a person when he weeps and he cries for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, observe these narrations. Imam alayhi salam narrates, he says that the merits and the benefits for the one who cries and weeps, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive all of his sins. If a person was to shed tears for Abi Abdullah, knowing that he has performed sins, great sins, small sins, even in terms of quantity, many sins, even if they equate the drops of the seas and the oceans, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive all of them. In one narration in particular, it is narrated by the Ma'soom, in which he says that if a person was to shed a tear the size of a wing of a fly, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive all of his sins, even if they equate the drops of the oceans and the seas. Imagine how powerful this drop is when it is directed towards Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. Beyond that, you find that this person on the Day of Judgment will be given special favors and mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This person will be resurrected, his heart shining, his face with a smile, when all other hearts will be dead and blackened, when all other faces will be seen crying, and in the state of grief and sorrow, this face will be shining. You find, for example, the one who cries for Abu Abdullah alayhi salam will be given intercession from Az-Zahra, will be given intercession from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. You find the special mercies is there reserved for the azardars of Abi Abdullah alayhi salatu wasalam. Not only that, you find that on the Day of Judgment they will be resurrected and they will be given close proximity with the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. They will be given the opportunity to ascend to the higher levels and the higher echelons of Jannah. This is something profound that we need to be mindful of, something that we need to be conscious of. That not only will this person enter the gates of heaven, but he will be given the opportunity to ascend to the higher levels of heavens as well. And so the question arises, hold on a second. On the day of Ashura, the enemies of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam used to cry as well. They say that when Hormala was asked to show or to throw the arrow onto the necks of Aliyun al-Asghar, half of the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad were crying and weeping. Does that mean that they too were recipients of the favors and the mercy that is there mentioned in these narrations, in these riwayat? We say, Kalla, of course not. Why? Because there is a philosophy behind weeping and lamentation for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. What's the philosophy? What's the purpose of crying and weeping for Abu Abdullah alayhi salam? When I cry for Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, I need to ask certain questions. I need to ask myself, am I or do I represent the message of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam? So he gave his life to preserve the message of Rasulullah. But am I or do I uphold that same message? Does my being resonate? Does my character resonate with the message and the risala of Rasulullah? My tongue will come forward and say, Ya laytana kunna ma'ak. I wish I was there with you. فَنَفُوزَ فَوْزًا عَظِيمًا. So that I would be successful with you. But what does my heart say? What does my character say? Does my character resonate with what I say? Does my character resonate with the message of Rasulullah? Because the enemies of Abu Abdullah used to cry for him, but their character was far away from him. Do I represent the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, or do I represent the army of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam? These are crucial, fundamental questions that I should be asking myself. And if I see myself, for example, in between, or for example, leaning towards the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, then I cry and I shed tears for Abu Abdullah, not to feel pity or to sympathize for him, but to use this to project my regret, to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seek forgiveness from him. I say to Ya Allah, whenever I cry and shed tears for Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, forgive me and forgive my sins, the great sins that I have committed, the small sins that I have committed, even if they equate the number of drops of the oceans and seas. Ya Allah, I take this opportunity to shed tears for Abu Abdullah, but at the same time, Ya Allah, forgive my sins and take me towards Sirat al-Mustaqim. This is the message of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. This was the profound message that was demonstrated by the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam, that when you grieve and lament and commemorate for Abu Abdullah, use it to spiritually enhance yourselves and move yourselves in proximation towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, even if you cannot weep, if the tears do not flow from your eyes, then fake it. Pretend that you are weeping, because that has an effect as well. There's a profound story, a narration from Sayyid Mahdi al-Milani. Sayyid Mahdi al-Milani, his heart, the love that he had for Abu Abdullah alayhi salam was profound. They say one day he goes into a majlis, and there was a zakir, there was a reciter, and once this zakir of Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam finished his majlis, Sayyid al-Milani came towards him and he said to him, he said, find me a handful of youths who have this pure love for Abu Abdullah and bring them to my house. So one day after the majlis finished, he picked a handful of youths and he said, let's go. Let's go take, he said to the youths, he said, let's go to the house of the marja of our time. So they went to the house of Sayyid Mahdi Milani. Sayyid Mahdi Milani was in the room. So Sayyid Mahdi Milani, he said to one of the youths, he picked a youth, he said to the youth, come towards me, enter the room. And the youth goes into the room. He goes and he stands alongside the Sayyid. After a while, he comes out and he is seen crying. Now this dhakir that was there, he witnessed this. He saw a youth go into the room. He saw the youth go into the room perfectly normal, but when he came out, this youth was crying and he was weeping. And then Sayyid Milani, he says to the second youth, he said, come. The second youth goes into the room. He goes into the room, he comes out and he is crying and he is weeping. The third youth goes in, goes in normal, comes out crying and weeping. Now this dhakir, this reciter is baffled. He said, what's going on? So as soon as the next youth went in, he went with him. He enters the room. When he enters the room, the youth, he goes and he stands alongside the Sayyid. The Sayyid says to this youth, he says, my friend, he said, my boy, sit. The youth sits down. And then he asks him certain questions. He says, my son, tell me, do you love Abu Abdullah alayhi salam? Do you love him? Do you support him? Does your character support him? What do you do when you hear the tragedies of Abbas? What do you do when you hear the tragedies of Ali al-Akbar? And he started asking all of these questions, one after the other, until this youth begins to cry and begins to shed tears. When the Sayyid saw that this youth was crying and shedding tears, he quickly took out his coffin and he gave it to the youth. And he said, "Wipe your tears on my coffin." Ajib. So he wipes the tears with his coffin. And when he's done, he returns the coffin and then the youth leaves. This dhakir, he comes and he sits alongside the Sayyid. He says, "Sayyidna, what's up with this? So what did you do and why did you do so?" Upon which the Maraja replies, he says, "Do you not know that this coffin will act as shafa'ah for me when I enter my grave?" And this dhakir, he replies, he says, "But you're a marja. You're a marja at-taqleed. People follow you. You're not a normal human being. You're not a normal believer. You are from the representatives of the A'imma alayhim as-salam. Your capacity, your level is much more different compared to all of the believers. You are in need of the shafa' of the Ahlul Bayt." Upon which the Maraja replies, he says, "We are all in need of the Maraja, of the shafa' of the Ahlul Bayt. And this will be my shafa', my own coffin, which is full of the tears of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. This will intercede for me when I enter my grave." My dear brothers and sisters, tonight is the day, or today is the day in which Abu Abdullah alayhi salam enters the city of Karbala. But before entering Karbala, they say that when he leaves the city of Medina, or before leaving the city of Medina, he goes towards the grave of his grandfather. Look at this, the last act of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam before leaving Medina is to preserve ziyarah. He goes towards the grave of his grandfather, and the narrations tell us that he falls unconscious. When he falls unconscious, he sees his grandfather in his dream. He sees his grandfather in his dream, Rasulullah. The Holy Prophet of Islam, he approaches Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. He approaches Abu Abdullah alayhi salam and he embraces him and he kisses him on his forehead. He kisses him between his eyes and he says to him, "Habibi ya Hussain, Habibi ya Hussain, indeed Allah has chosen for you. Allah has chosen for you that He wishes to see you qatilan shahida. That Allah wishes to see you slaughtered in the plains of Karbala." Further than this, Rasulullah says to Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, he says, "Ya Abu Abdullah, Allah has chosen that your women, that your children are chained. Allah has wished that Zainab and Kulthum, that Layla, that Sukaina, all of them are chained, all of them are shackled and dragged from city to city." Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, when he awakes from his sleep, he then proceeds and performs the ziyarah of his mother, Fatima al-Zahra, Sayyidat al-Nisa al-Alameen. Then he proceeds towards the city of Medina. When he goes towards the city of Mecca, he is driven out of the city of Mecca. Then he proceeds towards the city of Kufa. There's a narration in Bihar al-Anwar, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. He comes forward, he tells his soldiers, he says, "Intercept the army of Abu Abdullah. Make sure he does not enter the city of Kufa." They say they came and they interjected Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. When they interjected him, they said to him, "Ya Abu Abdullah, the permission has come. You are not to enter the city of Kufa. We will take you anywhere else, but not Kufa. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, he turns to Allah. He says, Ya Allah, look what they did to your grandson. Look what they did to the grandson of your Prophet Rasulullah. This is how they treat the Ahl al-Bayt of your Prophet Rasulullah. He turns to his companions. He gathers his companions. He turns to his family. He gathers his family. He turns to his sons and his daughters. He gathers all of them in one place. He doesn't say anything towards them or to them. He begins to cry and the tears flow from his face. Why? We can never know why Abu Abdullah alayhi salam begins to cry. But he turns towards Zainab. He turns towards Sukaina, and it's as if he saw the cheeks of Zainab being slapped. It's as if he saw the cheeks of Sukaina being slapped. It's as if he saw the veils of Zainab being taken away from them. He then turns to his companions and he sees blood flowing from their faces and their heads being separated from their bodies. He then turns to his son Ali al-Akbar, and it's as if he can see his son being cut into pieces. And he turns to his son Qasim, and it's as if he sees Qasim's body being dragged under the hooves of the horses. He turns to Abbas, and it's as if he can see the hands of Abbas being taken away from him. Then he turns to his son Ali al-Asghar, and it's as if he can see the arrow of Hormala piercing the neck of this infant, severing the neck from vein to vein. The Imam alayhi salam then proceeds towards the lands of Karbala. When he enters the lands of Karbala, he turns to his companions. He says to them, "Oh my companions, tell me, what land is this?" One man comes forward and says, "Ya Abu Abdullah, this is known as the lands of Al-Ghadiriyah." He says, "No, there is another name for it." He says, "This land is known as Shatt-Furat." They say, "No, there's another land for it. There's another name for it." They say to him, "Ya Abu Abdullah, this land is known as Karbala." He says, this is the land in which our blood will be spilt. O men, dismount from your horses, pitch your tents. This is the land in which we will give our lives. Then you find all of the companions, they dismounted from their horses. The sun and the moon. Who are the sun and the moon? Abu Abdullah alayhi salam and Qamar bin al-Hashim. They came towards Zainab. They helped Zainab dismount from her horse respectably the way she deserved. Qasim and Ali al-Akbar, they came and they sat on the ground alongside the horse of Zainab. When they sat alongside the horse of Zainab, there were steps for Zainab. Zainab began to use them as steps to reach the ground, because they knew and they understood that Zainab deserved to dismount from her horse with respect. All of the women of the camp of Abu Abdullah, all of them dismounted from their horses with respect and with honor and with dignity. But all of that changes on the day of Ashura. All of that changes on the day when the family of the Ahl al-Bayt were butchered. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون وآخر الدعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.